They say we should have known better than to fall so deep down into this rabbit hole we found. And I was thinking,
hi, this is Nico. You're listening to my dad Fall, also known as the White Rabbit and James Jardine on the one and only Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Buckle up and enjoy.
deep into this pool of regrettable situations. Pitch black, think back to the last time that we were happy.
Alrighty, good morning, and good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome down the security rabbit hole. Thanks for joining another episode of the Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. This is Raph. I have a friend, and we're going to talk about identity, which, it's making the news lately. So it's a good thing to talk about. First and foremost, just a couple of housekeeping items. One, check us out on the LinkedIn page if you haven't yet. The audience is growing, and we post. I'll post videos there. I post other things. It's where if you have the inclination and you want to reply back to an episode, say something about it, or connect with the person I'm interviewing, the most likely place to do that is on that page. The RSS feed is been growing steadily, so thanks to everybody. And apparently the last episode's largest audience was from Sydney, Australia. So g'day to you all down there. That was kind of cool, unexpected. And I have a page set up for supporting the show. If you are so inclined, for I think that what I'm supposed to say is for the cost of a cup of coffee. Except if you go to Starbucks, this is not that. It's the cost of a cup of coffee at like what it used to cost 10 years ago. You can support the show on a monthly basis, and it'll ensure that I can keep this thing going in the year 15. And God only knows, 600, 800, 1,000 episodes. Who knows? All right. Thanks for that. On to the show. Mr. Jeff Rich joins me. And Jeff, I'm going to let you introduce yourself just a bit because you're going to be better at this than I am. I just know that I can pronounce your name correctly after all these years.
Oh, thanks, Raph. And you do pronounce it correctly. Thank you. It can be a challenge knowing how it's spelled. Is this what, 631 or so? Is that about?
No, this one, 5. No, we're not there yet, man. You're time traveling with me. That's okay. This is 593.
This is something. That's a thing. So congratulations on that.
Thanks. It's been a couple.
I've been on 3-4 times now, I think.
You've been on a bunch of times, yeah.
More than that, maybe more than I can count right now. It's great to be back. I'm doing something differently than I am. Actually, I'm doing it the same way, but I'm doing something different than the last time I was here. I am now the executive director of the Identity Defined Security Alliance. I've been here a little over a year.
Okay.
And we are a nonprofit member alliance. Most of our members are corporations that focuses on the security of identity and identity security.
Okay. Got it. The security of that's an interesting way. It's the security of identity and identity security. All right.
So the reason I mention it that way is you can look at it two ways, and you can go back to, there's two things I'm going to call back to that you mentioned. One, identity, is in the news. And regardless of when you're watching this or listening to this, take a look at this week's breach. Doesn't matter when you do it, there will be one. And identity was associated with it. Whether an identity was compromised to get in and exfiltrate the data, or the data that's being exfiltrated or compromised is actually identity related to consumers or customers. That'll be the case every time. So that's the security of identity. Identity security focuses on the other half of it. What do you do to ensure the integrity of your identity? Not simply how do you not let it get disclosed. What do you do to ensure the integrity of it? Because identity theft, which does not always related to a breach, is a really big deal as well. If you ever had something and I hate to say it this way, as simple as a credit card number stolen, that's actually an identity theft.
Yeah. I've been in. I think I've gotten more breach notices than I've lost track. Somebody once very recently, I think it was on a LinkedIn discussion or something, said that, oh man, I wonder if I've been a part of this breach. My default answer is you've been a part of this one in like 70,000 other ones. I don't know if we can find a person in America that hasn't been had their information stolen in a data breach, which makes sort of interesting discussion, right? Like, hey, who hasn't? I think we should start counting those people that haven't and make them a pretty exclusive club, because they're either off the grid or very minimalizing in their exposure. But I get it. So the IDSA, you guys started, gosh, it's been a while.
About 6 years ago.
So Julie, what was Julie's last name that had that role first?
Julie Smith, still her last name. Yes.
Okay. That's a very simple last name. Yeah. So Julie took that executive director role, I think a while back when I was still with Optiv, I think.
Yep. And Optiv was one of the founding members.
Yeah. So, all right, tell me about then what it is that you do, the voodoo that you do.
Mm-hmm. So and I'm going to say what we do, because there's really not much here that I do that isn't associated with IDSA. And we do, I'm going to go through some of the basic logistics, and we have 2 main deliverables each year as well, in addition to other things we do. One thing I do is work on getting the word out, and thank you for giving me another opportunity to do that. But for our members in particular, let's say, a member like Optiv, I'm going to bring it up because you mentioned them, although we certainly have others. And I'm not going to list them all because I'll forget one, and that one will be upset with me. So
That's right. That's how it always goes.
Yes. It's kind of like the Oscar speech. I'm gonna forget someone. Sorry. But
yes.
So a member like Optiv, or anyone else like Optiv, can get a lot of benefits. Won't go through the whole benefits list, but some of the things that it can do is work on working groups. As an example, we currently have a KYC, Know Your Customer, or IAM, which is Customer Identity Access Management. And the terms are interchangeable depending on what country you're in. We have a working group focusing on what's really required for that. What should we be doing to influence regulators and standards bodies to say, if you meet these standards, and you can say, yes, you've done a KYC, you've jumped over that bar, and I'll accept whatever you give me, versus, no, you just say you know your customer, but is that your neighbor? Is that someone you like? Is it someone that simply paid you? And if so, should I accept whatever you give me, either as an identification or authentication or authorization? Say in a federated identity, as an example. So, so we have a working group going there, and that's in conjunction with another organization based in the EU called the Secure Identity Alliance. We signed a memorandum of understanding to work together. The 2 working groups we've merged them, so that we can get a better outcome that affects not only what happens from a commercial side in the US, which is really where the US bases it, and a more government and maybe even leaning towards a digital wallet perspective, say in the EU.
Have you guys thought, I hesitate to ask this because every time I ask about standards, we develop a new standard, and that's not where I'm hoping this goes. But have you thought, like, so what's the current thought on identity standards from the various ways we can identify someone, the various methods of federation, and keeping people from having to log in 74,000 times and having hundreds of passwords and tokens and FIDO keys and God only knows what.
Yep, there's a lot out there. So I'm going to start with the bad news. That mass of what's out there isn't going to disappear immediately. All right. But I do think we're 3 to 5 years on the horizon from being able to say, I'm Raf, and that's all I need to do. I may need to do my initial I'm Raf, and here's proof.
Yeah.
But that should be accepted in many ways. And I think the foundation of that, and by the way, I'm going to lay down, we are not a standards organization. We have no plan to become a standards organization, but we do like to be able to become the voice of identity vendors and identity customers to influence those standards organizations, whether it be NIST or the EU Commission or the World Bank. There's a lot of organizations that end up creating standards in a de facto manner. And we want to start saying, let's level those out and maybe influence them. And I think the way that's going to happen, I believe the way it's going to happen is through a digital wallet. Because you can make the case, oh, I have a USB key and this should be accepted everywhere. Okay, go to a small country in Africa and see how many of those are there.
But also USB key, really?
Well, exactly. Yeah.
Manufactured in China. Don't worry about the other software on there, kind of thing. Yeah, I get it. So you said 3 to 5 years. Okay, that is in IT though. 3 to 5 years is a unfathomably long horizon. But also, the flip side of that coin is with identity related things. We've been at the passwords are dead place for longer than 5 years, I would guess. And they're still not, there's no death to passwords anytime soon. So this format, we'll say 2 questions in this. Part 1 is why so long? And part 2 is why haven't we gotten there yet?
Okay. And I think the answer is the same. The first thing, the reason you may have heard me laugh when you said that's a very long time frame, I thought you were going to say that's a very short time frame because that's my perspective on it. And the reason is, I think the same for both. Let's say your organization, let's say you are the RAF company, right? And
Sure.
You have a bunch of different apps out there, and you have an operating system that runs, and there's a whole bunch of things that depend on the RAF company to make happen. You want to say as a RAF company, I'm now the standard because I'm the biggest out there. So everyone should do it the way I do it. And then the Jeff company comes along and says, well, here's how we're doing things, and we can't do it that way.
Fair.
So
okay.
That's the foundational reason why you don't have it yet. Because you're a commercial enterprise, I'm a commercial enterprise. We each want to say this should be the standard to do it. And neither of us say you're wrong, but neither of us say, yeah, I'll do it your way.
Right.
So there's rule 1. The second is that, and I think I know you well enough to know that this may end up starting an argument. I believe at some point governments are going to be involved to help make this work.
Oh boy. Listen, I would, Jeff, I love you, very much, but the anytime somebody says the government is here to help, I tend to cringe, except for maybe this one time, because at least at the state level, we've managed to figure out identity, my driver's license, for example, like reasonably well. Passports, while not infallible, are actually pretty good internationally and within the US. And the third reason really why I'm cringingly inclined to say maybe you're right is that everybody else has tried and catastrophically failed, and there's no incentive for anybody to like if Google were to say, hey, our Google authority, auth authority is going to be the federated thing for everybody. I can name 3 companies immediately that say, oh, hell no. Meta, Microsoft, name 7,000 others that are going to say, no, we're not going to do that your way. You have too much power. That gives you too much whatever. So it has to be a company or an organization independent of all of those. But I understand that there is, like, you have to de-incentivize profit from that, because otherwise all it's going to be is another authority that spies on you every single place you go, and that's terrifying.
Right. Now, government can do that as well. However, now let's say the third party, and I do think there is a third party play that doesn't have to be government, but I think governments are going to be involved for the reasons you said. Right now, the only way you can say, yeah, I trust your identity is, if you go into any facility that says, I really need to check who you are, they're asking for a government issued ID.
Right.
So I think that standard carries across. That's why I think governments are going to be involved. But then you can get back to an organization, say like ICANN. And once again, you can debate whether that certainly has been successful. A lot of people are debating if it's going to be successful going forward, but it has been. because it's been treated as an objective third party. Yep, here's your request. You meet the criteria for what we have. Here's your address.
So, counterpoint: if we make government the arbiter of identity, with great power comes great trackability. That is going to give that organization unfathomable insight into everywhere I click, everything I buy, every place I go. Are people going to be okay with that? I don't know. I don't think I am. I'm not sure that's any different than Google doing it, but at least, as much as Americans trust their government lately.
Yeah, see, I told you I had a feeling this was getting into that. I think that if you have a problem with being tracked, stay off the internet. And I'm not trying to be snarky here. That's pretty much where we are, in my opinion. Now, I'm not saying you should just accept it, roll over and say, yep, that's it. Go ahead and take me. However, and by the way, to your earlier question, if you wanted to identify anyone that hasn't been involved in the breach, they would not tell you who they are because that's how they've avoided being in a breach.
Right.
But to the earlier point about being tracked, there's government control and large commercial entity control, which needs to be influenced in yet a different way. And I'm actually going to avoid that discussion now because we are going to be there whether we like it or not. So we're going to have to find a way to do that.
Yeah.
But I do think the government core of here's how we identify you makes sense as long as there's a third party. There is a third party organization that most developed countries buy into that say, in order for me to accept your passport, you have to meet all the criteria that this third party set up.
Yeah.
And when you do that, I'll accept your passport. And I think that same sort of thing needs to happen in that, for lack of a better term, digital wallet. And my guess is there'll be a better term for that soon.
Yeah. So I begrudgingly say I think you're right. I just, as much as I want to come up with a better option, I just don't see one existing because the incentives aren't there. The incentives aren't there to, quote, do the right thing. The incentives are there to monetize. And when we start to monetize, potentially bad, I'm not saying all things bad things happen, but potentially bad things happen. Jeff, let's pull on, because you said something interesting. You said operating systems and applications. One of the places that this has this kind of effort, not this effort, but this type of effort has struggled in the past. I'm thinking like mammoth in a tar pit struggle. Is you have this very bleeding edge, which is of technology, right? Which is it's got all these advanced features, high encryption standards, what do you call them? Passkey, whether it's passkeys or Face ID or something, biometrics, something else. Right. And then the long tail back to 8-digit passwords, letters and numbers only on some archaic system in the back end someplace that is not going away anytime soon. And you have to, whatever you come up with, whatever method you have, right, to bring everything together has to work towards the bleeding edge, but also that lowest possible denominator. And what ends up happening almost consistently in these efforts is we abandon the really cool stuff because it's like, it's hard, and we downscale to lowest common denominator. And you're like, great, all you've created is a really crappy version of what we wanted. That's not what we wanted.
Yeah. So first of all, I'm not going to promise that that the iteration you see in 4 years is going to be the ideal state. However, I will say I think it makes sense to start categorizing what identities mean. Let me give you a couple examples that I think will make sense to everyone listening. I'm going to bet that you do online banking of some sort, and you identify and authenticate yourself to whatever level that banking authority requires. Right? You also probably do some online shopping, coming up with a different category. Whether it's with one of the big names, or you go to your supplier for whatever it is you do, and they sell it online. You go and whatever it is, you do some sort of online shopping, and you do some regular browsing, whether it's looking at information or images or videos that you want to see, whether you want other people to see that you're doing or not, doesn't make. But you have at a minimum those 3 levels of types of identities, right?
Yep.
If you use the account and authentication combination that you use for your bank on your browsing of whatever it is you're looking at, you're going to be in trouble, because that casual browsing site that you're going to, it's going to more likely going to get compromised than your bank. But when it's compromised, they're going to say, there's programs that say, well, I see this ID and this authentication. Let's see if it works anywhere else. Boom, there's your bank. So if you were to just those 3 strata and say, fine, let's get into, we want a confirmed wallet with a higher level for things like banking and what you're doing, maybe voting online or any government activity that has, ramifications. Maybe that's all in that category. And then you have some general use stuff. And then you have the, essentially the bottom that you're talking about. Let that stay there. If you need to do that, get out of your authenticated systems and do that separately.
Okay.
And that will do one of 2 things: either drive them away or drive them up to where they need to be.
Okay, fair enough. What's the new? So what's, if you put on your Swami hat for a second, what's that going to look like? What's the technology behind that? Like, what are we, if we're going to all have this 5 years from now, we're going to start seeing the beginnings of we'll call it a unified identity architecture of some kind, right? Ooh, unified identity architecture. I should trademark that. Make that maybe.
You
what does
could,
that look like?
although my guess is you're going to get a challenge on prior use. So,
probably. What does
because I
that
know
look
a
like?
few identity architects. So
Yeah. Fair enough.
But now the EU is trying to get there. Now they're lurching forward on it, and I think in a good way. That just recently they've drafted legislation that talks about every country in the EU needs to be able to meet a certain level of standard in order to have a digital wallet that can be shared across EU borders. They haven't defined what that criteria are yet. But that the first step is we're going to need that. Once again, that's the sort of thing I'd like to have our working groups start to influence. Not because we want to win it, but like, let's have a third party that doesn't have a commercial interest in it say, here's what makes sense.
Yeah, that's the important part. That is key. I'll sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but that third party does not have a commercial interest. That's so important, because that's what keeps us from becoming a monetization nightmare. Yep, you're right.
Yep. Now our members have commercial interest. There's no question, but because we're all in that room where you had to check your guns at the door. Yep. They're not there to serve that commercial interest. They're here to serve the commercial interest to say, hey, I'm part of that. And let them sell and grow from that, which is really the reason we exist, I think, and the reason organizations want to join us. And if you're an organization that does this and you're not a member, yep, this is a good reason to do that. So once I think you see governments start to say, here's a criteria that we need to meet, just like a passport.
Okay.
And then it won't be, let me sign up with a password and I have my digital wallet. It's going to have to be some form of, let me authenticate myself in a way that this organization or government recognizes. And it may be that you have to, at some point, go to a government office to do the first one. Or you may be able to have a combination of, your national ID card or your driver's license, along with some biometric, whether it's a voice print or facial recognition. There could be some combinations early on. But now I'm going to bring my physics background in, because I believe the future for this, and this is not going to happen in 5 years, but the future for that's going to be quantum. Because when you can create a quantum entanglement between this is who I am and this is who I say I am, in a session, that quantum entanglement will be maintained and its current state unmutable. And then anytime there's an attempt to even look at it or break it, it breaks. I believe that's going to be the next big step.
Okay.
Potentially after I retire, but I like to see it before that happens.
Look, I'd like to be hopeful in this endeavor, because I think the pessimist's view is a broken world. There's too many things today that allow me the easy button of going through Google's their identity and just federating it out. I mean, it's not fantastic. It's also not crap, right? But it's also not deployed, like not widely enough used. But I'll tell you, I use it in my one, like depends, right? If I have, as probably everybody else, I have a personal Gmail account and I have like a throwaway that where all the spam goes. I just delete everything and remove it every once in a while. Like that's the one I use for places that I know I may or may not ever come back to. Because you buy something on a website once, you're like, why am I giving you my personal information when I want to buy a scarf for an event and this place looks so shady? Not because they're sketchy, but like, you know, like they're going to do something bad, but they're so badly designed. This is a disaster. So can I get a throwaway identity? Can I get a one-time use credit card number? And that's fantastic. But I think that digital wallet concept needs to incorporate more than just the who I am, as in like, you know, the equivalent of my driver's license. I think it needs to incorporate things like some sort of payment option, right? But like a proxy payment option, right? Like Apple did it with Apple Card, where you get a ID, you know, a credit, their version of a credit card number, and there's other payment options on the back end from that you don't have to worry about whether. Look, I think that the payment infrastructure needs a complete overhaul anyway, much in the same way that social security numbers need to be completely thrown out and redone. But these are difficult endeavors, and it's been too easy to just continue to float along in you know, blissful ignorance for so long. What's the incentive, Jeff? Why would anybody want to do this? Why would anybody sign on? What's the interest? What's in it for them?
So the inertia that you're talking about that keeps everything in place is strong. All right, very strong. Because this is infrastructure we built. If I have to make this change, my small business is going to go under because I can't afford new infrastructure, new card readers, blah, 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 blah.
Yep.
All of that is there. You're absolutely correct.
Yep.
However, the incentive that's going to be there is, how would you like it if there was a level of guarantee that, one, you weren't going to have a breach, and two, should that be surpassed and you do, your risk is minimized, because we're taking that risk and creating a huge risk pool rather than the small risk pools that exist now with every sort of environment. I think that's where the financial incentive is going to be. And it's also why I think, whether you want to call it a government or not, I think there needs to be some sort of, for lack of a better term, a grant program that's going to say, here's an investment that you can make, we're going to make, so that you can upgrade your infrastructure and meet this standard criteria so that you can be trusted. And to the early comment you make, I do the same thing. I happen to have an Apple Card. And whenever I do anything, if I ever talk to someone and say, what's your credit card number? I have no idea. And it's not printed on it either. And they say, well, what did you use in the last? I don't know. Because for every transaction I have, like you described, I create a new one and it goes away. And I have like 17 email addresses because I have different categories of crap. But
see, this is kind of part of my problem is what you just said breaks. Probably like when I call the hotel, I'm like, oh, give you your last four of the card you use. I'm like, and I say, I have no idea. They can be like, great, can't help you. So we've got there's a lot to like. The infrastructure under like the identity piece, I think is the thing that's at the center of this universe of things that need to change. But as it radiates out, the way we do support, the way we do purchases, right? How we track individuals on web pages or across applications or even across mediums, from my phone to my laptop, out into, I don't know, some other device, like into my TV or whatever. It would be super great if I could have an identity that a single identity that I could federate out into small chunks, right? That I control what they get in some way. But it doesn't have to be like, because there's nothing more painful than using that stupid little keyboard with the click wheel on your remote to try to spell out a 64-digit complex password that you've created from one of your streaming services. Ask me how I know. When you're like, wow,
you got
this
the
is
character
a
wrong.
nightmare.
You need to do it over again.
Yeah, and you don't see it, and you start over. You're like, and
yeah.
It's awful.
No.
It's awful.
I'm with you completely on that, and I think what you talked about with the compartmentalization of different types of access, I think it's going to have to be the answer. It won't be one digital wallet with, hey, your ID is RAF, and here you go. It can't be that simple. There's going to have to be strata within it, and different risk levels, some of which you may not be able to. We could model what happens with government classification, that you can read down, not write up, and there's ways you could say, here's where an authentication identification can work. It can't work above this, but can always be displayed below. It's that sort of infrastructure, which sounds like, gee, that's a lot of work, that's impossible. But to me, that's a sort of DARPA-like project that could get us there with the right investments. And it's not just the US. In fact, there's another issue there, and I'm not anti-US, but the US seems to be the furthest behind of the developed countries to making this work.
We don't have, right. Well, we're also the one that cares the least, at least publicly, about privacy, which is where a lot of, I think, this stems from.
Well, this is the government that seems to care the least. I'm not a spokesperson for the government, but the commercial enterprises care the most. Where in most of the developed world, I'll pick the EU as an example, the government says, we know we need to have standards to protect the privacy of our residents. So here is GDPR. So I'm not blaming the US, because we're a capitalist, we're essentially the most capitalist large economy in the world. So it's working for us right now, but I do think we're going to have to shift towards that.
I wonder if it's going to take a shift in the incentive structure to make this happen, because I'm telling you, I genuinely think this is going to be super difficult to implement if nothing on the policy side changes, because even a dozen, 24, 100 well-meaning large enterprises that sell products and services is a drop in the bucket to the 10,000, 100,000 that would need to sign on. And this is one of those things where you've got to get this boulder to the top of the hill, and it's a mighty push. But once you get it over, right, it'll take on a life of its own, and then it'll be excluded. Then it'll be the fear, like FOMO. You'll get some company that'll be like, no, we're not doing this, and then like they're one of, their competitors are all on it, and their usability sucks because they require their own usernames and passwords, and people like, I'm going to go to your competitor because it's not such a hassle. And they're like, wait, whoa, messing out on customers and users. We're doing this. And suddenly things gain momentum, but that slog to that, now you've got me thinking 5 years is way too short.
Now you know what I meant when I think it's a short time frame. I think we're on the same page. We always, Raph, you and I always do this. We always take the route around and find out we're in the same spot.
Yeah. I tend to come around to your position more often than not, which just means that we should talk more often. But okay, so what's on the table like right now? So what's hot in the IDSA's world right now? What are you guys talking about?
So I'm going to talk about a couple of internal things that are real important to us. The first one is our annual Identity Management Day conference, which happens the second Tuesday of every April. So April 9th this year. And something that is expanded this year. I know I said I was going to have 2 callback. Here's the second one. You mentioned Sydney, Australia. We now have, this is Identity Management Day around the world. In the past, it's been like a 6-8 hour event during the day in the Americas, based in the US. Now we are starting at midnight UTC in Melbourne, Australia. We're going to have a healthy 6 hours of sessions there. And then I think there's about a little less than an hour break. And then we go over to EMEA, based, coming out of Paris with the Secure Identity Alliance that I mentioned earlier. And we're going to have about 6 hours there as well. And that will buck right up against the opening of the Americas region. And then we're going to have about 7 hours there. So we have a 21-hour event and you know how old I am, and I'm really wondering why I signed up for this. But actually, I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be a great event. It's free. There's gamification, just like if you were in an in-person conference. We have exhibitors in the Americas anyways. Once again, commercial versus not, right?
Right.
You can go to an exhibitor's booth and you don't have to get your ticket stamped. We actually track that you went there. You can interact with them. You can just push a button and they'll talk to you just like what you're seeing here, or you can download a white paper, go to a session you get, and then those with the most points go into a raffle for drawings at the end of the day. That was really successful last year. People were looking forward to it again. But more important, there's some really good content in here. We're going to talk about Know Your Customer, which I mentioned. You're going to hear a session on identity and zero trust. Zero trust, yeah, people are beginning to think that's getting worn out. Identity is a first pillar, and a lot of people are skipping past that. There's sessions on new advances in identity management. What sort of tools and products are out there? Plus, we have exhibitor booths. So it's free. You can register at identitymanagementday.org, all one word, .org.
Okay.
So really a big, and the second thing we do is every year we do a research survey that tracks trends in digital identity security. So once again,
When does that come out?
So that will be published. Actually, we're releasing it at Identiverse, which will be on, I think, May 30th. It's that Tuesday. So if
All right, we got to get you back on the show around that time because where's Identityverse this year?
It's in Las Vegas.
Of course it
is.
is.
At the Aria.
Of course it is Las Vegas. Why would it be somewhere else? Okay. All right. Well, maybe I want to hear more. I want to see some of that reason because that's going to be there's always some interesting stuff that pops out of that. I'm always looking for the counterintuitives. Like what's the thing that I would think of that's just not a real thing.
Let me offer one tidbit like that from last year.
Give me.
There's two comments from last year, right? Over 60% of the respondents, and these are 500 organizations of more than 1,000 employees. So this isn't
that's a significant number.
Yeah. So over 60% said they feel they have control over their identity security program and management in their organization.
60%.
Yeah. Over 80%.
The other 40 doing?
Oh, well, hang on a second. Over 80% reported a breach. See, that's exactly what I'm talking about. And that's something that we want to say, why is that gap there? It's not intuitive. It's actually counterintuitive.
Okay, two things hurt my brain about that. Like I said, where the other 40%? Like if you don't have control, if you don't feel like you have control over your corporate identity infrastructure, and then what? And then 80% of the respondents reported. And actually, you know what? That one doesn't shock me. That's simple. I don't think that shocks me. And here's why.
No. Okay.
Because as you said at the top of the show, identity is mentioned either front and center or at least as a drive-by in every single breach we've seen so far in modern times.
Yep, I agree with you. 80% on its own, out of context, is a completely understandable number.
Yeah.
But compare 60% and 80%. If 60% say they're doing well, should 80% be having breaches?
No.
So
unless we have a vastly anemic standard of doing well.
So that's what we're trying to figure out this year with our trends. Is it, how low is your bar? Or when you look across tabs, are the CEOs saying we're doing a good job and the CISO saying, no, we're not?
Hey, so, I hope, so do you guys keep track of, from survey questions, for example, like where does identity live? Because it used to live in security. Security got rid of it, moved it into like user compute or the systems group or applications group, and now it's like drifting. It's like the polar bear on the raft. It's going to eat somebody. It's floating like towards a number of different groups, and wherever it lands, it's going to eat that team. But I feel like it's landing on security more often than not lately.
Well, I think it is more often. So my answer is where it is all over the place. In some cases, it's HR. Because this is provisioning and it's more of an internal thing. Yeah, customers are different view. In some cases, they put it with the customer help desk. In some cases, it's insecurity. In other cases, it's on an administration team. Any of those can work as long as you do it well, in my opinion.
Right.
I'm less a fan of where it belongs as to how you're doing it.
That's a good point.
But the reason I think you're seeing a drift towards security, you can't do security without it. It is in the critical path for security.
Yeah, but the counterpoint to that is there all already not enough staff to do the things, and we're not going to get on this. Is there a giant talent gap? Because everybody pretty much knows my feelings on this already. But the question I would pose is giving this thing that's on fire that smells poorly back to the security team ends badly, because this is like passing the hand grenade at this point. Like, it's the pin is out, right? Somebody's going to be holding it when the breach happens, and then that's the team that gets in trouble.
Okay, when a breach happens, a security team's never looked at already?
No.
Okay, so let's get past that one, though. And this, no matter where it goes, if it's dumped on someone, it will fail. The only way this is going to work, this is why I say doing it right is more important than where you're doing it. You have to look at what it means. You have to look at ramifications. You have to look at what the investment's going to be. And that investment includes maintenance of it. I've seen companies that buy an identity solution and say, well, that was good. We spent that money and we're done. And 3 years later, they find out that a quarter of the accounts they have in their system are abandoned because the people aren't there anymore.
Yeah. That is a fun thing to think about. And by fun, I mean awful.
Well, it's doable. And I will say, not to plug the members, a lot of our members have good tools to manage that. But it means this is a function that may live somewhere, but it's a function in and of itself, requires an investment, requires people that have the right background in education or training to do it, and experience, and are supported to do it correctly. Just this is very similar to the security discussion you and I would have had 15 years ago about, we're not getting the right people, no one's trained, and people are just shoved into security. Identity's kind of there now, but at least some companies have learned their lessons. So I'm more hopeful than we were with security 15 years ago. And to your other point, I'm not going to have this discussion about the talent gap, because once again, I think you and I agree.
That one I think we violently agree on. All right. Well, I think that's about the time that we've got for this episode. Thanks for coming back to the show, Jeff. I'm looking forward to do look me up. Just drop me a note when you guys are getting ready to publish. Maybe we'll get you on to do like a teaser episode.
I think you could do that in, say, mid-May-ish time.
Mid-May. All right. That's getting close to that's getting dangerously close to 600. Ooh.
Hey, there we go. Right after RSA. And I want to remind everyone, identitymanagementday.org. Feel free to come.
Identitymanagementday.org. I'll put that in the show notes.
And by the way, if you miss a given session, they're all going to be recorded, so you can see them again.
Okay, that's even better. I think I'm going to go sit through that. I'm not sure about all the time frames in sequence, all the time zones in sequence, because I do need to sleep. But what?
I'll challenge you.
No, that's not what I'm gonna. No, that's not what I'm gonna want to play on. But anyway, all right, Jeff, it's been fun, Mr. Jeff Rich, part of the Identity Defined Security Alliance, folks. If you don't know them, you can go check out the conference Jeff talked about. We'll put it in the show notes. One more time, Jeff.
IdentityManagementDay.org, and our website is idsalliance.org.
There you go, IdentityManagementDay.org, and maybe I'll see you guys there. For the podcast, this has been Raph, and I've got my friend Jeff Rich, and I hope to catch you guys another time, another place, on another Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. I think I hear that music, which means we're done. See you later. Bye-bye.